We are indeed fortunate to have with us Dr. John Mack, professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, the Cambridge Hospital. John joined it in 1972 and was head of the Department of Psychiatry there from 1973 to 1977. And he's also founding director of the Center for Psychological Studies, which is devoted to the psychosocial study of human violence, conflict, and images of the enemy. As a child and adult psychoanalyst, he has applied the insights of depth psychology to the nuclear weapons competition, the global ecological crisis, and other collective phenomena that threaten our survival. His publications include A Prince of Our Disorder, which is a psychoanalytic study biography of Lawrence of Arabia, and for which he won a Pulitzer Prize in 1977. He graduated from Oberlin College, Phi Beta Kappa. He received his MD from Harvard in 1955 and graduated from Boston Psychoanalytic Institute in 1967 and was certified as a child analyst in 1969. In the last few years, John has been exploring frontiers of human consciousness and the nature and meaning of the UFO abduction phenomenon. In the CBS TV miniseries Intruders, which aired in May of 1992, the actor Richard Crenna played the role of a psychiatrist based on John Mack's experiences. For 4 years, John has worked intensively with more than 50 adults and children who report being taken onto spacecraft by humanoid beings and subjected to intrusive and sometimes traumatic procedures. To his surprise, no psychiatric or other conventional explanation for these experiences emerged. His work with abductees impressed him with the powerful dimension of personal growth that accompanies the traumatic experiences, and he therefore co-sponsored the 1992 MIT Conference on UFO Abductees. That was not open to the public, it was by invitation only. He's under contract to Charles Scribner's Sons, the publisher, to write a book about his findings, and today he's going to present an overview of the clinical features of UFO abductions, and then he'll discuss the possible social, philosophical, and spiritual implications of the phenomenon. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. John Mack.
I'm going to, since there hasn't been on this very tight 2-day program, I'm going to try to cover an awful lot of ground here this morning, not only to talk about the implications of the abduction phenomenon, as John mentioned, but also to try to give some kind of an overview of the phenomenology, because I don't assume that everybody here is deeply familiar with it. So I'll be picking up from some of the things that Bud was talking about last night. There's a story that the Tibetans tell, which I think captures some of the dilemma that Colin was touching upon when he spoke of the disinformation that is going to come our way and what that's about, why this culture resists so violently the implications of what we're confronting now. We're really in a kind of might be called a paradigm war. It's a war worth fighting. It's one of the few wars I think that is worth fighting. And to set out very, very broadly what the paradigmatic divide is here, it might go something like this. The view of reality that we have been taught over the past 300 years, increasingly in recent years, in which an organization like COP is interesting. In other words, an organization which has taken upon itself to monitor any effort that we or anyone else makes to broaden our notions of reality beyond the physical world as we have known it. In other words, that view of reality is that all intelligence, all that really exists, is the physical world as we can know it with the senses and with the rational parts of our minds. And that intelligence is basically a phenomenon of brain tissue, particularly ours. And that if we discover intelligence beyond ourselves, then that's a projection of our minds. That's an extension of our own intelligence, but perceiving it in the universe, but that the universe is itself not fundamentally intelligent or containing intelligences. The other view, which will be implicit in my talk, and really I must admit that my own view of my own worldview was very much like this sort of exaggerated materialist view I just stated. My own view has radically changed, I think largely as a result of this work. I mean, I was kind of on my way, I would say. John referred to consciousness studies. I was already working with Stan Grof and exploring consciousness through non-ordinary states of consciousness, meditation, holotropic breath work. And the other paradigm, the other worldview, is that the universe is inherently intelligent, that it contains intelligences, and that those intelligences now are desperate. Like Colin talked about the desperate situation. Well, it's not just us that are desperate. They are as well. Now this, the problem of the resistance to the expansion of reality that is implicit in the alien abduction and related phenomena, like the crop circles, the resistance to that, that expansion of consciousness, if you will, is contained in this story that the Tibetans tell of an old frog who had lived all his life in a dank well. One day a frog from the sea paid him a visit. "Where do you come from?" asked the frog in the well. "From the great ocean," he replied. "How big is your ocean?" "It's gigantic." "You mean about a quarter the size of my well here?" "Bigger." "Bigger? You mean half as big?" "No, even bigger." "Is it as big as this well?" "There's no comparison." "That's impossible. I've got to see this for myself." I mean, at least the frog was willing to see for himself, you know. I mean, they set off together. When the frog from the well saw the ocean, it was such a shock that his head just exploded into pieces. Now, that story will be in the background of much of what I'm going to be talking about, because I think it captures the violence of the resistance of the Western mind to the expansion of consciousness that is implicit in the crop circles, in the near-death experiences, and I believe profoundly in the alien abduction phenomenon. Now, it's a matter of dosage, you know. I mean, when we try to talk about this, I'm trying to, you know, I can't get up on the stand on a soapbox in Harvard Yard and say the aliens are coming, there's intelligences out there, wake up, you know. Not only would the heads of the, I get an image more of heads rolling than exploding, and particularly my own, you know. So there's the matter of how we communicate and reach people, and how we expand the circle of knowing, and I think it's a matter of dosage, because we are talking about truly radical shifts in consciousness here, in perception of the world. Now I have, I think I have been selected. You know, everybody why are you selected for this? Why are abductees selected? Why are investigators selected? Nobody knows, of course. But I have, one of my kind of secret thoughts is that the dumber they are, the harder they fall. You know, I was perfect. You know, I mean, totally rational. You know. Raised in New York City, you know, and knew everything, very intellectual, went to the right schools, very good representative of the sort of the conventional psychoanalytic, psychiatric worldview, as you heard my credentials. I mean, I was like perfect, you know, for, you know. Now, one of the questions is, am I going to be able to communicate effectively as a result of my credentials? It's a race between credential effectiveness or being totally discredited by the debunking community. So it's kind of nip and tuck as far as that's concerned. I'll tell you, I never had more respect for the tenure program than I do now. You know, I mean, courage is one thing, but you know, I mean. There is a certain security in tenure. I mean, there are, if you don't do anything really, really bad, you can sort of more or less keep your position. I mean, I think there's an advantage. If people say, why don't you leave Harvard? It's not very congenial to what you're doing. I don't think I should do that, though. I think it's good to sort of, you know, kind of stick it to them from within, you know. Anyway, what happened? Okay, I was working with with Dr. Stanislav Grof, who has used non-ordinary states of consciousness to explore beyond the dualistic view of the, you know, the superego, ego, id. I'm the doctor, you're the patient. To explore levels of memory that go beyond the symbolic structures of early childhood, to go into perinatal experiences, memories of infancy, which we're not supposed to be able to do because the brain isn't myelinated and neuroscience doesn't say that's possible, and yet people do remember birth and under conditions of non-ordinary states of consciousness. He also developed knowledge of the transpersonal realms of the psyche, the ability to identify with consciousness virtually any mythic being, identify clairvoyantly beyond ourselves to reach other people, to be intuitive about what's going on with people we're separated from, knowing at a distance. In other words, that the psyche can be separated from the body. We can travel in time with the psyche. Past life experiences become possible. So I was working with Dr. Grof, and then a colleague in my training group asked me one day in the fall of 1989, so I am a relative newcomer to this. He said, would you like to meet Bud Hopkins? And I said, who's he? And she said, he's a man who works with people who report being taken by alien beings aboard UFOs and takes this very seriously. And I said, he must be crazy, and so must the people that he is working with. She said, no, it's very serious. So one day in January 10th, 1990, you know those dates you kind of remember because your life isn't the same since? She took me to see Bud, and I had some time. I was doing something else in New York, and I had some time, so I went to see him, and I was impressed with his personal qualities, as you know them, his warmth and caring and, you know, sanity, and more or less, you know, and but even more than the feeling of personal confidence that I felt being with him was the stories he was telling me of people that he'd been working with for then some 14 years from all over the United States and beginning in other countries, who were reporting consistent accounts of being visited by strange humanoid beings and being taken up by them on beams of light or some other energy source into UFOs and subjected to highly elaborate, intricate procedures, particularly of a reproductive sort. And the details among these people corresponded down to very, very fine points. Among people who had no contact with each other, details that were not in the media, who had nothing to gain and everything to lose by coming forward, were not out for profit. And I don't, and the abductees are very reluctant to speak up about this because they're so used, as Linda talked about last night, to being shamed and ridiculed. And as far as I could tell, and as a psychiatrist, having worked now in that field for more than 40 years, then not 40 years, but now more than 40 years, there was nothing I knew about that behaved like that, except real experience. Dreams are not like that. Psychosis is not like that. There is no psychiatric condition that behaves like that, where people all over a huge territory, not in communication with each other, are reporting very detailed traumatic experiences with authentic feeling. That's a central aspect of this. See, that's the thing we're supposed to know something about. I mean, we don't necessarily get it right, but psychiatrists are, the thing you're trained about, you're mainly trained as a clinician to be able to do, is to make a discrimination about mental states and about whether somebody is believable or not. Now, we get fooled like everybody else. We know, we don't necessarily, we get hoodwinked too, but we're supposed to have a little bit of an edge there of being able to tell whether somebody is expressing emotion and talking in a way that's sincere and authentic and not about something else. And the individuals Bud was talking about were expressing authentic accounts of their experiences. And since then, of course, in my own work, now with thousands of hours, with more than 75 people, I'm deeply impressed with the authenticity of the communication of abductees about what they've been through. They are not talking about something else. They're talking about exactly what happened to them. Now, having said that, that's where the subject really begins, because what is happening to them? What is the source of the experience? Now, I'll just say a word about how I work, because it is related to the work I did with Dr. Groff. It is a kind of I didn't really do much hypnosis before. It was kind of out of fashion, associated a little bit too Svengali-like for me, and but I realized that I had to learn to do it again, to do this work, because there is something about the use of the non-ordinary state of consciousness, the opening of consciousness that occurs with hypnosis, which is central to doing this work. It's almost like a template. It's like a mirror image that it undoes the repression of memory that occurred during the abduction itself. Now, there's a lot of, one of the favorite tools of the sort of professional, was it, Linda was saying last night, if some PhD scientist starts attacking you, take it seriously. Well, I don't, but I mean, there is a major attack around hypnosis, which is that hypnosis does not accurately reflect memory. People get wrong details in hypnosis. Now, that is, in this instance, not an applicable argument for this reason. Those studies are based on situations where people are being asked to recall factual details about something that is not of vital importance to them. That is, witnesses in a courtroom, for example, that are being asked, which way did the car come in, on the right, the left, and people in those situations are subject to suggestion. They can get it wrong. It's not accurate. But when we are dealing with a matter of absolute life and death, vital, traumatic importance to an individual, and that comes forth in hypnosis, it is not a question of accuracy of memory. There can be little details off here or there, but the person is, you do not get inauthentic expression of powerful, emotion around trauma with hypnosis. You get an enriching deepening of what is going on. In fact, I've been impressed that the accounts, particularly when you're getting a teenager, for instance, I have several cases where teenage male, for instance, will report an abduction consciously remembered, which is quite in his favor. I'm thinking of one man in particular, where they described they'd taken on a ship and they had sex with the alien, and then there was this ecological information, and the whole thing was told with kind of bravado, and it wasn't that bad. You know, that's conscious recall, an ordinary state of consciousness. With hypnosis, the non-ordinary state of consciousness, the account will be far less congenial to the self-esteem of the reporter. That is that it's the alien female did not have intercourse. The whole thing was quite mechanical. There was a suction cup put over the penis. Sperm was forcibly taken. There were instruments all around. The whole thing was quite ignoble, quite humiliating to the self-esteem of the teenager, and told with a lot of embarrassment during the hypnosis. The hypnosis account, and this applies in case after case, is more believable than the gloss that is often put by the ego on the consciously recalled account. What I do is probably, since it's very difficult to teach an old dog new tricks, well, that's not quite accurate. You can learn new tricks, but you can't teach an old dog the old tricks that he failed to learn before. I think that's the accurate way to put it. So, so I've had to invent my own way of doing hypnosis, and I do a trance relaxing state creation, but I combine it with a use of the breath, like in meditation and in the Groff breath work, which is not rapid breathing with evocative music as in the Groff breathwork method, but slow, deep, centering breathing, like in a meditation, to bring the experiencer back to their center. Because as Bud said last night, the emotion, the feeling, the caring is more central than getting the story, what happened, the narrative. That will come in time, but there's no rush about that. But what is important is that the person be centered in themselves, that they integrate. It's an expression I have, it's called integrate as they go. In other words, I don't want someone to go out of my office with tremendous emotion and experience uncovered, and then they're not being able to deal with it. Because when an abductee embarks on this, it's a journey, and there is tremendous emotion involved. And most of them, however, don't regret that they started on that journey. They have I think that it's a very fundamental matter for human beings that we really do not like to have a part of our lives that we don't know about. And that's the most common thing. They say, there's something that's been happening to me. I've been having these experiences, and I really want to know about them. I know it may be scary. I know it may be disturbing. Now, I just want to say a word about science, okay? When I started to do this work, I went to Thomas Kuhn, the author of The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, who has written about how paradigms and worldviews change and science changes in that regard. He's probably the leading historian of science from that point of view. And I knew him from childhood as a family friend, and I said, Tom, I think I got one. That is a paradigm change going on here. And what should I do? And he gave me two pieces of advice. One was, he said, the word science does not mean science now. It means a new theology. In other words, science is the place that the Western mind has applied the emotion that used to go into religion. It has become the new faith. Call it scientism. Now, I'm not speaking against the learning that we can get through Western science, but the unwillingness to move our way of knowing beyond the subject, object, I'm here, it's there, there is nothing but the physical world, and the restriction of the instruments of knowing to that dualistic way. That's what he's talking about. The other piece of advice he gave me was, put aside your categories. language structures reality and limits what you can know. For instance, real, not real, happened, didn't happen, true, false, inside, outside, exists, doesn't exist. Those are all dualities which seem sacred to us in a way, but they are constricting. Something, even in quantum physics, something can be a wave particle at the same time. Something can be physically in this world and not in this world at the same time. But our minds have been structured according to those language polarities. So he said, put aside those, be conscious of them. I can't put them aside, you can't avoid it, but be aware of it and try to just observe, just take in raw information, and then later figure out, take a look at what you got, because ultimately it is your intellect which will integrate any information that you obtain. So that's what I've done, by and large. The other thing I want to say about knowing is that we have restricted the way we know. In other words, if we only use the sense organs and our rational minds, then we will only learn about the physical world. If we want to learn about what the abductees often call the worlds beyond the veil, or other dimensions of reality, then we have to use our whole selves. The instrument of knowing must be expanded to include the psyche in its totality, human consciousness, our being, our feelings, our spirit, our bodies, if you will, the total instrument of ourselves for knowing. Then we can learn more than just the physical world. Then we can be investigators of any number of other kinds of entities in this intelligent universe. Now, Western science doesn't like that, because this Philip Morrison at the MIT conference said to me, he was over here, and Dave Pritchard brought in some of the big guns from MIT and Harvard to sort of say what was wrong with the abduction, and they were talking phenomenon, and they were saying, well, we don't have a cigarette lighter from one of the UFOs. If I'd been quick, I'd have said, but they gave up smoking hundreds of thousands of years ago. But I wasn't that quick. But I turned to Phil Morrison, who was one of the major figures that helped develop the atomic bomb, and a colleague from the anti-nuclear period that I worked with, and I said, Phil, I said, but what about our consciousness to learn about the universe that way? And he said, oh, we have enough trouble perfecting our instruments. Consciousness is so messy, he said. Well, if we're going to learn, we got to be prepared to have some messiness in the way we learn. All right. The phenomenology of abductions. I'm sure most of you know about this, but basically what happens has been reported from throughout this country and all over the world. The data is extremely robust, and basically a man, woman, children as infants, is in their car, bedroom most frequently, schoolyard. You heard about a snowmobile last night, and they will hear something, a hum, a buzz, or they'll see a strange light, or they'll feel a presence. And to their shock, they become immobilized. They may see the little humanoid beings or one of the other types. I'm not going to go into the whole demography of alien beings here, the different types. I'm only going to be able to touch on certain points here. And they find themselves, to their shock and consternation, being taken up or out through a wall. They experience a kind of vibratory feeling as they go through the wall. Their body seems to become like a ghost of what it was, and then it reforms. And then they're taken up into a ship. They sometimes see the ship, they sometimes don't. In the ship, they're subjected to being stared at by more alien beings. There's a leader inside, they call the doctor or the leader, who runs the show. Is a little bigger, looks older, more wrinkled usually. And tissue samples are taken, They are probed, the head is probed, sometimes little implant-like structures. And again, we thought we were going to get the smoking gun. If we're going to get the implant, we're going to prove that some bizarre combination of elements never found on Earth is going to show us what this really is. I've come to the view that the physical evidence, which is very strong, and which you heard about some last night, the cuts, scoop marks, the lesions. One man had a big scraping out of his mouth after one of these experiences. The pregnancy removal, but it's always elusive, it's always subtle, and I think that's intrinsic to the phenomenon. I don't think, whatever the intelligence at work is, this I think is very powerfully expressed in Colin's talk, I don't think it is going to give us the smoking gun that would be evidence for us in our dualistic, physicalist, space-time constricted consciousness. It is going to reach us with a higher intelligence and ask us to stretch ourselves to learn about it. It is not going to make it easy for us. We are going to have to grow to know this phenomenon. That's kind of like an opinion, you know. I mean, but that's my sense, because I just don't see the, you know, it has to do with consciousness. I mean, there was a science writer at the Boston Globe who, at the MIT conference, debunked the conference and called it witchcraft and this and that. And so I called him up. I never do this anymore, but people said, you got to call him, talk to him. He can talk to him, you know, we know him. And so, all right, so I talked to him. And I finally ended up saying to him, look, Chet, if, from what you're saying, if a UFO landed in the Boston Garden and every Boston TV channel photographed it, and it was covered in all the articles in the Boston Globe and all the mainstream dailies and weeklies, you still wouldn't believe it. And he said, I think you're right. He said, I have to admit that. He says, it just can't be. All right, so why did I tell that story? What was I saying? Anyway, I guess it has to do with the fact that I don't think that this is going to change simply because we get good physical evidence. I think it's going to change because our whole way of looking at ourselves, knowing ourselves and the world will evolve and change. Now, there are two central, and this again is from my own data, because none of us have authority in the establishment, you know, the consensus reality world. So I can't draw on any authority in doing this, because, I mean, I don't have authority, but certainly nobody else will in the world I'm trying to reach. If I'm going to preach beyond the people that already accept what this is about. So I'm talking how I've structured this. What happens is two major things. One is the hybrid program, that sperm is taken from men, that eggs are removed from women, something is done to the germplasm, it is reconnected, reimplanted in a woman, there for a certain amount of time, the woman experiences pregnancy changes, then this fetus is removed on the ship. During subsequent abductions, the women may see those little hybrid infants being reared in, and they see little incubatoria, cubicles, that the men may be brought to see their offspring as well. That's less common, but more and more now I'm learning about that. The fetuses then become children, babies, the hybrid babies with a wispy hair, kind of a combination of us and them, with larger eyes than ours, wisps of hair. They appear listless, although the abductees insist they're not listless. It's just our projection and perception. I don't know. That's one of the great mysteries here, is how are these hybrid beings going to function? Anyway, the women are asked to nurture and hold these, the men too, which is a very poignant, one of the most disturbing aspects of this work is the debate that women go through. Should they hold them? They know they will have no control over when they may ever see this hybrid child they are told is theirs. The aliens watch this heart-giving, nurturing quality of ours. They're very interested in that, as Bud said last night. sometimes I have a few instances where there are young adult hybrids who seem to be performing functions of showing information on screens to the abductees. So this hybrid program, which is said, they are told, that is the abductees are told, has to do with some repopulation of the planet after the ecological holocaust that is brewing, that's what this is all about. Now the second fundamental feature of the abduction experience is what might be called expansion of consciousness. And that has to do with the trauma. It's a paradox of the trauma itself that the consciousness expands with the trauma. And it occurs through information. Now, we think of information as cognitive. You know, you're sitting in school and you're bored and somebody's telling you something. But information is not, that's not what I mean by information. I mean information that is brought to the abductees on the ship in two ways. One is mind-to-mind communication, and all communication is telepathic between the aliens and us. And that is experienced as deeply felt in the whole organism, not just cognitively. Every cell in the body of the person feels this information, and the information is by and large about the effects of human destructiveness. Nuclear war, but particularly the ecological crisis that Colin was talking about. That they are shown images which they feel in their bodies, and they weep as they talk about this, of the earth destroyed, of pollution, of the earth, apocalyptic images of the, and I'll say more about that at the end, of the earth coming apart, and they experience this as prophetic, okay? And then one of the debates is this a literal prediction of the future, or are these warnings of what might happen if we don't change our ways? Because the choice is up to us, I think, how we interpret those apocalyptic images. And now, the impact of the abductions on abductees, again, is twofold. There is, as we heard last night, the traumatic aspect, which is extremely powerful, extremely important, and very disturbing. It has 4 parts: to be rendered helpless, taken aboard ship, have all these things done to one is against one's will, and they don't ask, as Linda said, very upsetting. The second part of the trauma is the isolation. Abductees cannot generally talk. They tell their parents, even if the parents are abductees, they don't want to hear about it. And the parent is likely to say, oh, you had your nightmare again, your bad dream. No, Mom, it wasn't a bad dream. This really happened. They were really there. There were really these little beings in my, oh, you know, there you go. There's your imagination again. You know, so the abductees learn to go underground. And similarly, when they're adults, they can't just go into the office place and say, guess what happened to me last night? I was taken up by alien beings up on, oh, there she goes again, you know. So they're isolated until they get into a support group or find a community like this where they can communicate about what's going on. And that's the second part. The third part of the trauma, and this is, I think, the most fascinating part because it relates really to the central theme of my talk, is what I call ontological shock. This cannot be. This is not the way we were raised. 300 years of acculturation told us that the world does not contain intelligences that behave like this. And if there is spirit, if there is God, he certainly isn't going to permit little guys with big black eyes to come from, you know, God knows where and come and take our women and children. That's not the way God would behave. So this can't be. It just doesn't fit the reality that we have been taught to believe. And so it's just as shocking as Linda reflected as to them as to us, and that's what, you know, whether our heads explode or not, it is surely shocking to us. The fourth part of the trauma is that it isn't over when it's over. Most trauma, the rape that happened when you were a teenager or whatever, horrible as it may be, or being in the Vietnam War, or seeing your close friends killed, or feeling some complicity, you can work it through. This you can't work through. This is not something to get over. It's never over. It's always part of the experience of the person. And often abductees will come to see me when their children, they think, are involved, and they feel they can't protect the children, and that becomes the point where they arrive. Now, that's the trauma. The other part of it is what I call the transformational aspect of this. And this is highly controversial, okay? This is where Bud and I have had some very interesting conversations. Is the transformation, in other words, the growth, the spiritual opening, the sense of one's deep connection with the earth and with the opening of heart that many abductees undergo, a different sense of our relationship to nature, is that simply the human quality of what happens when we grow as a result of anything that's disturbing in our lives, or is it a built-in fundamental aspect of the phenomenon itself, not simply a byproduct? Now, I'm going to stick myself way out on a limb here, and I'm going to say I believe it is not a byproduct. I believe it is a central aspect of the intelligence that is at work here. I believe it is fundamentally, as fundamental as the hybrid program itself, this is fundamentally concerned with opening our consciousness and expanding our sense of ourselves to a different relationship to one another and other species and to life and nature itself. We can argue about that later on. Theory. What would a theory, I'm not going to give a theory, but I'm going to say what a theory would have to cover, because it is extraordinary that I can give a lecture on this subject, paint the whole phenomenon, all its sides, and somebody will say, you know, a psychiatrist, because usually a lot of psychiatrists where I talk up and bother, someone will say, yeah, but that sounds like a birth trauma, or that sounds like anorexia nervosa, or, you know, that sounds like a displacement from sexual abuse. Now, a theory, however, has to cover 5 major dimensions of the phenomenon. The consistency of the reports among people from all over who don't know each other, down to minute detail. Right? 2, the physical accompanying phenomenon, that people, it's out of the house, it's not just out of the body, as Bud says, that people are not there. And there are many cases where there are witnesses who say the person is missing. This is not simply a psychological matter. 3rd, children as young as 2 years old report this phenomenon with great feeling and with nosebleeds and marks, and they'll point in the sky and with fear and say, Mom, Mother, go up in ship, little man, bite my nose, take me up, play with me, you know, 2 years old. Personality theory is going to have to really stretch to include those 2-year-olds, you know, and I have several of them in my practice. The absence of a psychiatric condition. These are healthy people, by and large, who have been traumatized. These are not people who have a psychiatric disorder. There is not a single case where one of these accounts was explained on the basis of a psychiatric disorder. That's only 4. What is the 5th? Oh, interesting to forget this. The association with UFOs, okay? I have many cases where somebody is being drawn by a power on the highway. They're moving along, and cases where they don't even see the UFO. They're missing time. When I do hypnosis, find they were led off into a field and they had a whole abduction experience. The next morning, after the experience, there'll be reports in the paper that a UFO was sighted in the community going along just where they were, right? Independent of their experience. So, all those 5 have to be accounted for by any theory. Now, there's no theory, I'm sorry to tell you, that can account for that so far, except exactly what the abductees say is happening to them. But, of course, the only problem with that is it absolutely shatters our worldview. All right, now I'm going to quickly go through, I'd like to leave some time for discussion. How much time do I, where's John? Half an hour? Okay. Some of the implications of this, and I'll just touch on them. Clinical implications. I cannot tell you how abused, this is professional abuse, okay, not child abuse, sexual abuse, how abused many of the people I see have been by mental health professionals who have tried to fit their cases into some familiar category. You know, we mental health professionals are very much like the generals that are accused of always fighting the last battle. Well, we always try to fit people into the last popular diagnostic category. In this case, it's sexual abuse. Now, abductees may be sexually abused by the aliens. In fact, I've worked with people where they have tremendous sexual problems, but they're related to the rape-like quality of the abduction experiences. And abductees who have been sexually abused, many of them have because it's very common in this culture, are very able to distinguish the alien abuse from the human sexual abuse. Memory. Teaches something about memory. I have cases where somebody hasn't remembered anything for 25 or 30 years of their abduction, and suddenly something will trigger it. They're walking along a shore, a rocky shore in Maine, one case where abduction occurred when the man was a teenager, and suddenly the whole thing comes back. And yet, it was never mentioned in the family, and that's very common. How does this switching off work? We could learn something about our minds, I think, from these experiences, not just about abductions. Clinically, very interesting. It also, by the way, this completely, there's so many ways in which this phenomenon makes a mockery of many of the kind of conceits of Western empirical science. Take one, a favorite one in my field, epidemiology. Okay, how many cases of XXX are there? Okay, now in this situation, it depends when you ask. If you ask several of my people before a certain date, they would say, no, I had none of those experiences abduction related. You ask them after the memory is triggered, they would say, yes, I have been abducted. In fact, there were these beings and the light and this came and this happened. Now, what does that do to epidemiology when it's not linear anymore, right? Well, yes, it depends when you ask. I mean, it doesn't work with epidemiology. Now, another thing about clinically that I think is very interesting here is emotion. What we're learning about emotion and reality. Because the way we learn about this phenomenon is through emotion. That is, people that work with abductees, and it is extremely strenuous. I mean, I don't think that, well, we could spend a lot of time, but the power of the experiences, I mean, the body shaking and the intensity of feeling. And I had one case of a woman, a very controlled, nice social worker in Boston who I had her psychiatrist come to the regressions, and I mean, this woman was sweating and writhing and shaking and screaming during this experience, and he, who had been a skeptic, he said, I know, Cheryl. I mean, that's her. I mean, yet I've never seen her behave like this, but she is not capable of behaving like this unless it's something authentic. So he's been working with me. I now send him cases. There's nothing like getting out of the well, like the frog, getting out of the well and looking, They don't want to hear. They got theories, my colleagues, but they don't want to look. Anyway, emotion, the power of emotion. When we can really confront and experience our feelings and our emotions, that's when the experience transforms. In other words, and this is what happens is, I often find that the traumatic aspect of it, that is the victim experience against the intrusive aliens, that will change if I can stay with the person through the depth of the terror and the feeling, the emotion. A point is reached where there's an acknowledgement, a surrender, a moving to another level of consciousness, and from that point on, when I do subsequent regressions, what is selected is not necessarily, maybe other abduction experiences, but they may be experiences that are more transcendent, more information-giving, more about a change of consciousness, not just a repeat of the old traumatic experiences. And subsequent abductions will not have the assaultive traumatic aspect. There is a way that is, and this is not blaming the victim or saying we choose in the sense that Bud was appropriately critical of. This is that there can be a shift in the nature of the phenomenon as the consciousness of the experiencer evolves. And that again depends on a very complex relationship, a kind of co-creative activity that occurs between the experiencer and the investigator. I won't go into details about what, because you're familiar with this, but the implications of this for physics are just enormous. For medicine are great. I mean, how does this healing occur? For example, many people are healed of all kinds of lesions quickly. John Altshuler has described the healing of the pathologist of cuts, lesions. I had one man who came after an abduction, had a 3 or 4 inch gash down to the bone after an abduction experience, and he wanted to go to the doctor. Before he go to the doctor, the thing healed overnight. How does that work? Medicine could learn a lot from that. Paradoxically, they also are sequelae of physical distresses, gynecological problems, OBGYN problems, sinusitis. So at the same time they're healing, they're also creating problems for us, for sure. Philosophical implications. I've touched on those already. This opens us to vast new realms of reality. Abductees will commonly say, when I ask them, well, where is this happening? What's going on? They say, it is not, I can't, this is people who are not necessarily philosophically sophisticated, people who, so it has a kind of quality of genuineness about it. They'll say, well, it's hard to explain to you, but this is not happening in our space-time universe. This is happening, I can't explain, but it's not in space and time as we know it. So this is opening, they say it's beyond the veil, it's another dimension. I could spend a lot of time on that, but I want to leave time for discussion. I just want to touch on these major areas of implications. Spiritual implications. And by that I don't mean they suddenly become believers in God in a kind of old-fashioned way, but what does happen in this transformational dimension of this is that the experiencers will connect with something they call the source of being or home. That's a common word. And they will break into tears at a point in the experience where they see this luminosity, this connection with an energy source, with a God source from which they were cut off at some time in this or in a past life, and they experience us and the aliens as both deriving from that source. There is also a profound re-sacralization of nature. Nature becomes sacred. The connection with animal spirits, you heard about that last night, that becomes profoundly meaningful. The sense of oneness and connection with all of creation is a spiritually expanding quality that evolves here and is, I think, a fundamental aspect of the phenomenon. Implications for human identity are vast. Who are we really? Are we this earthbound masters of the earth and the universe, one among millions of species but preeminent, and here to exploit this piece of land and its resources, a kind of giant marketplace for the greed of the human species? Is that who we are? Ethno-nationalists, Bosnians, Christians, Jews, Irish? Or are we, as one of the abductees at the Seattle conference said, are we children of the cosmos? Are we connected to one another, to all beings, to all ethnic groups, to all peoples? Are we connected in the cosmos? Now, following from that are obvious political implications. Now, there are two ways that I think this has profound political and economic implications. One is what I call the politics of ontology, and this is where this backlash that Colin was talking about is going to come from. That has to do with the fact that there is a political investment in the old worldview. A lot of major scientific, professional, governmental, institutional, corporate investment in the old worldview. It's very, they're huge, they're careers. I mean, this is, my God, you realize how many people are going to have to go back and be sort of like they talk about recalling the Pinto. I mean, they have to recall the whole scientific establishment here as a result of this. I mean, so there are huge vested interests, but it's not just material vested interests. There are emotional, intellectual, our worldview. I mean, we fight wars over ideologies, points of view, differences, different ways of seeing and doing things. It gives us our sense of security. It's again the frog in the well. If we have to change our worldview too quickly, too rapidly, we're afraid we're going to explode. We can't bear the anxiety of the expansion of consciousness that this implies. So that, I think, is where the heart of the resistance is the metaphor of the head exploding. Can't stand it. Well, the formal religions don't like this either, because it's one thing to, religions make the decision that to let people discover for themselves their spiritual roots and connections. These powerful forces out there is dangerous. So there's always, every society always has somebody deciding that there's the right way to think and the right way to believe and a right way to worship, and the mystical qualities that Bud was talking about that he finds in his art, and I kind of find in the crop circles and in his work. Those qualities have always been dangerous. I mean, if you want to discredit somebody, call them a mystic in my neck of the woods. But what that means is that we're discovering our connection and our oneness with the cosmos for ourselves. So this is very threatening to organized religion. Now, finally, what is all this about? And John's going to talk about this, and I guess I've really covered most of what I wanted to say about that, but just to summarize, it's got these two pieces to it, this hybrid program, this creating another species, presumably for the post-ecological holocaust that we're preparing, but it could also be a warning. It also could be a metaphor. Again, metaphor we think of as a purely psychological matter, but in this situation, metaphor can be reified. In other words, metaphor can become concrete and real, which is something that interests me a lot. I can give a lot of examples where metaphors like tubes, meaning which represent birth canals that are physically experienced, for example, are also symbolic, where creation of another species here could be real and physical at the same time, telling us we'll have to find another way of evolving to another level, another species. The other thing it's about is, again, another intelligence reaching us to try to warn us about, and this is where the apocalypse comes. I think it is a warning. I think it is getting us deeply, so we feel it deeply, totally, so we do something, so we change our ways. We, as Rilke said, we have lost the senses. Those senses have atrophied, by which we can know the spirit world. The spirit world has no choice if it is to reach us, but to reach us in the only language that remains to us, which is the language of the physical world. It must come to us to reach us, and I think this is where the crop circles come in, and it must teach us of the intelligence from outside, because we no longer can reach out to God or to the anima mundi, or the higher consciousness. I don't even know the language of it. I've touched on why the resistance to this shift in paradigm is so momentous. I think it has to do with how deeply attached we become to worldviews, even if they're catastrophic in their implications, as our materialist worldview has become. There's a philosopher friend of mine, Richard Tarnas, who wrote a wonderful book called The Passion of the Western Mind, and Tarnas summarizes this way the arrogance of the Western governing assumption, as he puts it. He says it is that any meaning the human mind perceives in the universe does not exist intrinsically in the universe, but is projected onto it by the human mind. This, he says, this complete voiding of the cosmos, this absolute privileging of the human, is perhaps the ultimate anthropocentric projection, the most subtle yet prodigious form of human self-aggrandizement, and represents an intellectual hubris of cosmic proportions. Tarnas again. There is, I think, a rich body of evidence to support the idea that the cosmos, far from being devoid of meaning and intelligence, is, and now Tarnas's words, informed by some kind of universal intelligence, an intelligence of scarcely conceivable power, complexity, and aesthetic subtlety, yet one to which the human intelligence is akin and in which it can participate. So I see the phenomenon that way. I see it as an invitation for us to participate in this cosmic intelligence. Now, the fact that it is so traumatic and cruel and rude does not dissuade me from that point of view. I think you do not expand consciousness, you do not learn except with terror. I'm not sure that's always true, but it is an intrinsic part of the expansion of consciousness, you don't crack open such a tough nut as the Western mind without distress. Zen teachers, as you know, may whack their recalcitrant students over the head with a mallet to get them to pay attention and to open up their thinking. This is like Zen learning, or something like that. So, finally, to me, abductees are heroes and heroines. They are on a heroic journey, and they come back from that journey, like Joseph Campbell said, from the hero's journey, and they teach us about the world beyond the world we have known. Why don't the spacecraft land on the White House lawn if they're trying to teach us? That's the reigning cliche, I think, of the resistance movement here. And that you hear that even among, we even ask ourselves that. I think it's not just that the leaders would panic and panic the rest of us, or they try to shoot them down or whatever, or kill the aliens. I think it's deeper than that. I think they don't do that because that's not the way this works. This is not about hitting the leaders over their heads so they all teach us now, like good children, now look, the aliens are here, and the government says releases their files, and that's that. This is about our total minds, our total culture, opening ourselves, reaching out, expanding. It's subtle. It's subtle. It's allowing us to grow, to expand, to open to the phenomenon. It doesn't work in such a crude way. Now, I can't prove that. Again, that's not in the domain of proof. It's the sense I get from the work. Finally, I believe that these apocalyptic images, which are so prevalent now among abductees of the destruction of the earth, is an invitation. It is saying, this is the future. But you have a choice. We have a choice. It is inviting us to choose something different. It will not force us to choose anything different. It is inviting us to know ourselves. The alien abduction phenomenon, I believe, is a vehicle in the cosmos for a possible cosmic correction. That the Earth exists as an absolute jewel, perhaps the highest achievement of the divine consciousness that we know of anywhere, anyway. And that it is not a neutral matter that we are on our own destroying it. And that this is an intervention, awkward in some ways, magnificent in others, inviting us to another level of being. It is asking us, as Colin said, to know who we really are in the cosmos, to become creatures of the cosmos, respecting the divinity of the earth and one another, and opening to possibilities, both terrifying and really quite wonderful potentially. And I mean no disrespect to any abductees that have had horrible, traumatic, terrible experiences. That is part of this process, gruesome as it is. But I think we can understand the trauma in a larger context without in any way, saying that abductees have not reached some higher level of consciousness and that's why they're having it. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that the traumatic and the transcendent are deeply interwoven here and part of a larger process which I think we're beginning to get glimpses of as we talk to each other in situations like this, beginning to get some glimpses of what this may be all about. Thank you very much.
We have 10 minutes for questions. I'll ask John to repeat the question and then respond.
Go ahead. Do you know who to pick? I don't know.
I've heard here and from most abductees that whenever there's any question about why this is happening, the answer is always that they're doing it to preserve their own species and not for our good. And it kind of reminds me of saying that Hitler added to human knowledge by the experiments he did in the concentration camps. I don't think the motive is for our good.
Well, again, this is a linear. The question is not for our good. I mean, that we maybe the aliens are really doing this for their own species and not for our good. Again, I think this is an either-or, dichotomizing and too linear a way of looking at it. No disrespect, but I think that the way I would look at it is that both species are in trouble. Okay, that the aliens, there's an expression that the angels weep to have a body. That the aliens are not embodied. They are, as Bud said, they are fascinated with our sensuality, our loving qualities, our maternal qualities, our sexuality, and yet and that they perhaps had that. I have some data about that, that they've lost that. They become separated from they've become disembodied in a sense. We have lost our connection with the divine source. We have become totally materialized. And that in some way, it may be that, and I have evidence that some of them come from some kind of place where science destroyed their planet, and that they are in some way impoverished in their own situation, but that I see it as a more kind of joining of two species that are in some way, in some mutual struggle, but also mutual connecting, and for some purpose that serves both. God, I don't know who to call on. This is so difficult. Yeah.
I just want to say that another aspect of what she's saying could be for everything in the universe, for every negative, there's a positive. And while she's giving the negativity of it, where they're increasing their own beings or they're compiling a better form of being, the positive aspect on Earth is that there is an upgrading of awareness and consciousness.
The statement was that for every negativity there may be something positive, and that there's an upgrading of consciousness. Yes, I mean, I think that the paradigm shift, one of the fundamental aspects of the paradigm shift is what I would call the integrating of polarities. In other words, our minds tend to see things that are good for us, as bad for us. Are they good guys, bad guys? A kind of adversarial structuring of reality. And I think that and many religions do that. There's the devil and God, and there's the evil and the good. It's not that those are not real. It's just that the task, it seems to me, or I'm a Serb and you're a Bosnian or whatever, or Muslim or Christian, whatever, that the task of this time is the integration of polarities, of including the dark side of ourselves, or the dark side with the transcendent. Yeah.
So I have 2 questions.
Ask yourself by using a tape recorder and ask questions on a tape recorder. Don't do it. No. I could just stop there. No, but no, because you need, these are very powerful emotions and feelings, and you need somebody there to be with you and hold you emotionally, if not physically. And I would not do self-regressions around abduction experiences. The second question is Sheldrake. Rupert Sheldrake, he's referring to as a British biologist who has a theory of morphic resonance. Is this morphic resonance? I've been interested in Sheldrake in connection with the past lives and the transpersonal aspect of this. I don't necessarily look upon the past life experiences literally, that so-and-so was an Egyptian painter, as one of my cases in the Middle Kingdom, but rather that consciousness, as we open it, has the capacity to tune in to collective memory all over the cosmos, all through time, once we open ourselves beyond a purely materialist way of restricting. Somebody way in the back. Yeah. Question is the change in attitude toward life of abductees similar to the near-death experience? Absolutely. I think they're very closely regarded. Ken Ring might want to comment on that. Ken, you want to say something? We have the world's expert on connecting the two phenomena here. So Ken has worked profoundly in this area. Would you say something, Ken? Do something right now which is a little unorthodox, which is to call on, would you willing to be called on, Sue, for a couple of minutes? We have an I warned you, said you would, an experiencer who I think has a perspective which might be useful in this context.
Okay. Basically, I have been through, I'm sorry, my name is Sue. I'm an experiencer, and I've been through many of the experiences that many of you all have been through. Excuse me. The trauma, the fear, the anger, and everything. And what I learned was, if I stuck with it long enough to try to find the answers, excuse me, and balance myself, I came to a point where I found that the experience was maybe something other than what I had originally thought. I lost my fear, and the key point is, when I lost my fear, the nature of the entire experience and subsequent events changed, and it became positive. So I think the important factor here is that the nature of my subsequent events changed completely when my mindset changed. And I did have events after that, and they were educational in nature. So.
whatever. Stay up here. Maybe they have a question for you. I don't know. Is Michael Grosso here? Is that right? Oh, Michael, do you want? Yeah, I keep seeing you across the room. Do you want to say something about? I'm so yeah. Well, I almost wish Bud were up here at this point. I mean, I think that we're hopefully getting to a place where more people are recognizing the phenomenon, more willing to work with people. Hopefully some grant money will begin to come in so people who don't have the means can be worked with, can be supported. We've started a small program at Cambridge where called PEER, a program for extraordinary experience research, which is support public education and research for abductees, and which does not, involve having to pay. But I think that it's a very big problem. I mean, I think there are very few people. I mean, it's interesting that most of the people that pioneered in this were not mental health professionals. Bud is an artist, Dave Jacobs is a historian, James Harder, I think, is a experimental physiologist, or I mean, they're not engineer. They're not basically clinicians, and little by little, clinicians are beginning to recognize this and not pigeonhole people. And I think if you inquire around in your community and call our program, we may be able to identify someone. Where do you live? You live around here? Catskills is somebody that nearby that is open to it and can talk about it. And people are starting to learn hypnosis who hadn't learned it before. And I mean, it's a big problem. I mean, I think that it's okay to talk with friends, but the friends are often not, if you talk to other experiencers, that's one thing. But if you talk to friends who know anything about it, it can be worse, Yeah, Bud.
I just want to add a note on that. I'm going to have a little, right after lunch, I'll have some sheets.
Would you object to having us take copies of this lecture you have given and present it as a program for...
Would I object to taking copies of this lecture and presenting it to physicians in their community? I would be thrilled if you were to do that. Any strategies for expanding knowledge in this area beyond those of us that are sort of already concentrated together on it is all to the good. Thank you for your question. You want one more question? Back there, yeah. No, I don't want to do that. I mean, there are a few. I don't feel up to date on it enough. I know of a half a dozen or so. I know that there is no smoking gun. That the most intriguing. I mean, they tend to be materials we're familiar with when they're analyzed. The most intriguing one. I don't know if Bud, you want to comment on the X-ray that disappeared? No, not too complicated. It's such a complicated field. I don't feel as we can talk about it afterwards. It's just a whole big area. We get one more. Yeah. It's a whole field in itself. I think it has very little to do with this field. I don't think false memory syndrome is that accepted. I don't think false memory is relevant to this field. False memory has to do with a kind of political a kind of political sort of enhancement of the child abuse, sexual abuse area, which is very complex within the profession itself and is not about people who are having very powerful, overwhelming, authentic memories of some kind, which may not be precisely what they're saying, but is more or less what they're saying. I don't think it applies to this field. Yeah, you, and then we're going to stop. Yes. Speak up loud. Okay. Did you? Yeah, some of you heard him. For those of you who didn't, he's saying that this is most of the comments refer to the Western mind or worldview, but that there are thousands of native cultures for whom connection with other entities would not be so extraordinary, and that whose spirit, knowledge, way of knowing are open to that, and that those of us that work in this field might want to communicate with those cultures more systematically to share knowledge and information, because there's a body of information out there that we've ignored that would be relevant to this field, which is, I think, a good place to stop. Okay. Thank you all.